Welcome to the American Intelligence Media, the home of the anonymous patriots and some not-so-anonymous patriots. And we have one of those on air today, Michael McKibben. I am your host, Douglas Gabriel. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Douglas. Glad to be back.
People are just worried about you. They want to know if you're lost in the mines, whether you went down in the mines of Moria and you met the Balrog and you never came back, or what. So they're going to be so relieved to hear your voice. Thank you for being with us today. So you want to give us any excuses why, is it because of the great discoveries you've made? Is that why?
Yeah. We've been pulled. We've had to pull teams in several different directions. We had a team working more on Richard C. Walker, and then all of a sudden, this Facebook hearing and Zuckerberg's no-show in London pointed the light on a little-known British lord who has opened up a whole Pandora's box out of the UK on what's going on this planet. So I don't know how much of that we're going to get into today, but it's phenomenal.
Now, is he a lord? Is he a baron? Is he a count? Is he a duke? I forget. Little Ricky.
He's a baron.
Little Baron Ricky Allen. We just
Stop
found.
It now.
No, I'm sorry. He's
Baron Richard
Okay.
Beecroft Allen.
Oh.
Was the person who appeared in lieu of Zuckerberg. At least he showed up. Zuckerberg didn't even show up.
Little Ricky showed up for Dude Zuckerberg, and they were so mad at him. I think ultimately it was like 12 nations had demanded...
It was more like 25.
Oh, okay. They demanded to have this meeting with Zuckerberg, and he sends a guy we didn't even know was there at Facebook, and then when we look into who this guy is, it's like, what are you talking about? Lord Richard Allen. We have Lord...
Baron
Nicholas,
Richard Allen.
Lord
the difference
Baron.
A baron is technically a lord, but I've had it explained to me by knowledgeable people who have these titles in their family that baron is the lowest level of lord. There you go.
I'm so glad you're here to keep us straight, because most of that I make a joke of, because when they start giving it out to entertainers, please, really...
Hey, some of those entertainers probably deserve it more than these guys do, I guarantee you.
Well, that's a good point.
At least these entertainers did something that we all know about. In this case, these guys are all cardboard cutouts, it seems.
I mean, Sir Paul McCartney, you can tap your foot to, but Lord Jeffrey Patty, I mean, what are you going to do with that? You don't even know he exists. So,
Sir, he's a sir.
Sir. Oh, my gosh, I'm so glad you're here to keep me straight on this. Now, going back to Little Ricky, okay, we find out Little Ricky's got a good friend, and his name is Little Nicky. And Little Nicky, Sir, Lord, Baron, whatever he is, he's got so many titles, I can't remember all of Nicholas Clegg's titles, who was just recently hired at Facebook, basically to take over the collapse of Facebook and to make sure that it was timed appropriately so that the British could get their money out of the stock market based upon, of course, the FAANG, Facebook being the top one. The whole stock market's actually hinging on Facebook. So here they send over the previous Deputy Prime Minister of England, Nicholas Clegg. He's taking over Facebook. Why doesn't he, as you ask, why doesn't he go and answer the questions for Dude Zuckerberg?
Technically, he's becoming vice president of communications, global communications, in Silicon Valley, in Palo Alto. But apparently, he's not moving there technically until the new year.
Smart on his part, but why they would send somebody that powerful? Now, what's really, really weird is that Little Ricky and Little Nicky go back to the British Parliament, and Little Ricky followed in the footsteps of Little Nicky. This is getting too weird.
Reverse that.
Okay, it's getting too weird. These two are basically bunk buddies, and they've both come at this time to Facebook to help save Facebook, and now they're even the face of Facebook. Dude Zuckerberg's not even going to show up anymore. We're going to get some Brits, one of whom is in the British Privy Council, the Queen's British Privy Council, and the other one who is, of course, Lord Baron, whatever, all these different titles.
Baron.
But what was beautiful is that you found the weakness in this soy boy. Oxford Internet Institute. Can you tell us about that and what Richard Allen had to do with that, and why it was that that, as well as his connection to Cisco, your researchers put together an amazing timeline. Again, another biographical timeline that is out of this world with all of
it's definitely the definitive biography of him now.
Oh, totally, because his biography was hidden before, and you can't even find out much about him. He comes from very, very humble roots, and then he just gets placed in these powerful positions, all of which have to do with the future of what technology will be used to control basically the world economy. And I think that's what you've discovered here. Of course, that's speculation on our part, but it seems to match up. So Richie Allen comes to America, and he's already been at Facebook, and he's so connected there that when Dude Zuckerberg is called on the carpet by 20-some countries, they send him. He can't answer a single question.
Everything was correct about that, except he didn't come to America. That meeting was in London.
Oh, yeah, right. It was in London. And what is it for? It's
last week.
It's basically, he better be prepared, because every single country in the world is going to sue Facebook, as they've already been sued by the European Union. We're talking about untold billions of dollars. And if they don't get it straight, and if they don't make amends for what they've done, which in fact they're not making any amends, Facebook gets worse by the day, and they don't even make excuses anymore. Dude Zuckerberg said the other day, free speech? Oh, that's too hard. I'm not going to do it. Literally, those were his words. Free speech, that's too hard. I'm not going to do it. So he does need some nice British lords, ex-members of parliament, to come and to do a nice presentation to every country in the world to tell them why Facebook stole your data and sold it for $4.32 to anyone at this moment. All your data, everything they ever collected from you, they sell to anyone. Brad Parscales had a wonderful, wonderful hour-long interview with some person attacking him the entire time, but he revealed just how corrupt Facebook is, and how he'd had nothing to do with Cambridge Analytica. He didn't use any information from them. He simply went to Facebook and pushed a button that anybody can push, and he got all the information he wanted.
Yeah, I saw that interview. It was very good.
So it's
very credible.
Facebook it's over. It's collapsing. The FAANG is collapsing. That's why the stock market's taking these fallbacks, and the Brits and all the people who invested, the big investors, are all gone out of Facebook, as I'm sure you could tell us in great detail. But
no, I really can't. I don't spend a lot of time studying that organization, actually. No.
Well, we do know that Eric Schmidt, early on, he got in before the IPO and got out, and he was a billionaire. And I think Dude Zuckerberg had a plan of getting out, and he amplified it and got out faster than you can imagine.
All the insiders in Facebook sold about, I think that the amount was almost $7 billion worth of their insider stock on day 3 of the IPO back in 2012.
That's what I'm talking about.
On May 18th.
Plus, they had a rule that allowed them to do this.
No, they had an exception that allowed.
To the
rule is insiders are not allowed to do this on an IPO normally. And the whole idea there is that if insiders are selling their stock right out of the chute, then the company must be overvalued. And so the SEC normally will not allow insiders. It's called a hold period for insiders, and it makes them hold their stock for a number of days so that the rest of the market can make a market in the stock, and eventually, once it settles down, then the insiders are sometimes allowed to sell some. But it's all disclosed. The public's supposed to know when it's happening and why it's happening, and there's supposed to be a lot of communication. But in the case of Facebook, these people all sold, nobody knew about it, and they made a fortune. And it all was hinged on an exemption that Facebook was given by the Securities and Exchange Commission, by the the attorney inside the SEC that used to work at Latham and Watkins, which is where is the attorney firm for James W. Breyer, the chairman of Facebook, allowed an exemption from having to disclose these insider trades.
Now,
and it caused Kramer to go nuts on the air on CNBC, and he specifically focused on Peter Thiel. But then he was censored essentially by his boss, and therefore stopped talking about it in a few days.
So let's see. Let's list some of those insider traders. Was Larry Summers one of them?
I don't know the whole list. I just have to look that up.
I think Sheryl Sandberg.
Off the top of my head, it was Peter Thiel, Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, Mark Zuckerberg, James W. Breyer, Excel Partners, Meritech Partners, and several others.
Which are all people who benefited from the IBM Eclipse Foundation's theft of Leader Technologies' IP and trade secrets.
Yes.
And it's just disgusting that to this very day, after working with you for all the time that we have, every time we look into something, we find that these people enriched themselves from the theft from Leader Technologies, including Richie Allen.
That
Nicholas Clegg
spilled out of this analysis of his testimony. We hadn't spent a lot of time looking at the insides of what was going on in Europe at the same time, and especially in England. But in looking at his background, we started seeing all the telltale signs of a cardboard cutout early on. The first one that we've learned is always an early telltale sign is when somebody never talks about their parents. Now, that may seem a little bit humorous, but I'm proud of my mom and dad, and no matter what their background is, I'm going to at least identify who they are. We could not find any time that he ever talked about the names of his mother and father, ever. And one researcher had to go digging into archives of the British Parliament, discovered their names, and discovered their professions. And his dad's profession when he was born was a chauffeur, and his mother's profession was a personnel manager. Now, those are humble beginnings. It's quite honorable jobs. So why is a person specifically going to write his parents out of his resume unless it doesn't fit the narrative? And that appears to be what it is. So that was the first clue that he's going to hide things. And then we started looking at all of his different bios out there on the web. Now, here we're talking about a lot of people who are involved in this. So I'm just giving you the summary. He was born in 1966 in a suburb of Sheffield, England, which is a big steel center for the UK. He grew up and was sent to primary school up through high school. In our case, it would be a high school education at a very elite school called Oundale School. The unusual thing there is Oundale is as expensive as Harvard, and normally would not be affordable by somebody on a chauffeur's and personnel manager's salary. So there we got a clue that somebody was sponsoring him at the school. Then we learned from very knowledgeable sources in the UK that Oundale is notorious for being a very promiscuous co-ed public school, which is private, would be a private school to us. But in England they call them public schools. So there, as we now know, that a lot of these exclusive private schools are breeding grounds for recruiting by the British elite as spies, as people that they want to control in various industries and the like. And so that was another clue something was probably going on here. Then immediately went to Cambridge University, which, as we know, is a notorious recruiting ground for MI6, the British spies. And then after that, his resume took a very odd turn. He studied archaeology and anthropology at Cambridge and did a few things in archaeology after university, and then went for a year and got a master's at British Polytechnic. Now, I lived in the UK, and not too far from Bristol. Did I say British? I meant Bristol. Bristol Polytechnic. And that is an odd transition for somebody who had just attended Cambridge University. And I'm definitely not an academic snob, but I do know that Bristol Polytechnic is a school where students go if they're not able to get into the higher level technology programs. To spend only 1 year at British Polytechnic was odd, because in 1 year in information science, after coming from anthropology and archaeology, you're not going to learn a whole lot. First, you don't have much of a background in technology, and then in 1 year, about all you can do is develop a vocabulary for technology and maybe learn a few acronyms and buzzwords. So he did that for a year, and then he married in Bath in Somerset, and then immediately went to work for the British Health Service. For 6 years, he was a manager, and then he was pushed forward to become a member of Parliament for his Sheffield area. And he was a member of Parliament from 97 to 2005. And he's focused in Parliament in information technology in IT. If you're in IT and hear that kind of background, you're thinking something's funny here, because nobody with that little background knows anything about IT. So there's another clue that he's taken orders from someone else, and that he's just a cardboard cutout. During that time, he became a trustee of the Sheffield City Trust, and that is an organization that manages many public services. But also during that time, we did some parallel constructing and found that Serco got many contracts in the Sheffield area while Richard was, what do I call him? He wasn't a lord yet. So Richard Allen was a member of Parliament. There again, make a note of that, Serco, Sir Geoffrey Patty. Then I started thinking, well, gee, maybe that's where his dad got the connection. As a chauffeur, maybe he drove Sir Geoffrey around. We were just speculating. We don't know. We would like somebody in the UK to find out for us. And that's my request there. And then, while he's also a member of Parliament, he's invited to be a fellow in an organization called the Oxford Internet Institute. It is a think tank not unlike the Strategic Communications that are Cambridge Analytica. So this seems to be the Oxford version of Cambridge Analytica. And we started looking into the background of Oxford Internet Institute and discovered an unlikely coincidence. And that is that it was funded with £15 million of donations by a dame, Daphne Shirley, about a week and a half before IBM put up $20 million in the United States to form the IBM Eclipse Foundation with our former patent attorney, James P. Chandler. So you've got Oxford Internet Institute and the IBM Eclipse Foundation forming at the same exact time in late 2001. And then during that time, Serco continued to get contracts, and then he actually went and spoke at a Cisco conference, which he disclosed to the Parliament in 2003. And then during that time, he also blogged. And I guess he felt the need he had to blog since he was a supposed information guy with his 1 year of training at Bristol Polytechnic. And his blogs are out there to read. So we took the time to read every one of his blog posts. All I can say in summary about these blog posts is that they are milquetoast as technology blogs. There's no specialty. It's just general narratives about open source, about patents, about this and that. There's nothing deep. It's a mile wide and an inch deep, the whole blog. But in that, he specifically expresses his antipathy to patents. And let me just read you. He wrote, He was in favor of abolishing software patents because he found that they were a serious threat to innovation and creativity. Isn't that a convenient opinion, since you're involved in a process that's probably stealing a patent that you're going to make a lot of money off of?
One of the largest and most expensive and far-reaching patents, a set of patents of all time. So, yes, he's not really into patents. He's just into stealing them.
Right. But he's out there writing as a member of Parliament that patents are bad and need to be abolished. Well, the irony is here, he left the Parliament, what did I say, 2005, and he kicked around for a while. And then Nick Clegg came in and succeeded him in his district up in Sheffield. So there's the connection with Nick Clegg, and he was Nick Clegg's campaign manager. And then after he left Parliament, he immediately went to work as European Director of Policy for Cisco, where he worked for a number of years, 4 to be exact. And as we all know now, Cisco is a creation of the rogue CIA. So clearly this man was destined for greatness as long as he did the bidding of his handlers. That's our conclusion from that. And then he went on, he was involved in a number of other things, but then in 2009, on June 26, Facebook hired him as their European public policy vice president. So that was in 2009. In 2010, the Queen announced that he would become a Lord. The interesting thing about that timing is he became a Lord 2 days before the end of our Leader v. Facebook trial. And several days before that, he had been invited to become a member of the World Economic Forum. So clearly somebody was taking care of their boy. And since then, he's continued to work at Facebook, and of course none of us knew any of this history until he popped up in London and was the brunt of a lot of jokes around the world. And there you have it. So that was our introduction to Baron Allen of Hallam of Ecclesall, County of South Yorkshire. That's a mouthful. Mm-hmm. It's an area that probably has maybe 20,000 people. Each of your videos gets more reads than his whole constituency.
That's pretty funny. So then I get a title?
Yeah.
I'm looking for a title. I'm just a lord looking for a title.
We got to figure out one that's worthy of you. How about Emperor Curmudgeon the First?
I love that.
There we go.
That is me. I don't even know what it means, but I'm certain that is exactly who I am.
Well, when I think of you, I think curmudgeon. You are a curmudgeon.
It's my job. I'm like a wrathful bad angel, that you do not want on the side against you. And today with Little Richie, Little Richie. Okay, Little Richie, dadgummit. From the beginning, I keep saying, I know there's a Brit that was
Baron Allen. Baron Richard. Say Baron Richard.
Baron Richard. Oh, that's no good. How about Baron Allen?
Okay, fine.
Okay, Baron Allen. He helped. We always said, who is the Brit that was there when IBM Eclipse Foundation stole Leader Technology stuff? That would be Little Richie. Little Richie Allen. And then, who was there when Cisco was caught as being the NSA's backdoor to every router in the world? In other words, 100% full surveillance. That would be Little Richie.
Oh, by the way, here's another coincidental development. We tracked his Cisco service, and he served at Cisco from 2005 forward, left Cisco, and within 12 months after leaving his European position, Cisco put in $1 billion to fund Hillary Skoklovo Tech Center in Moscow.
Isn't that beautiful? And then they're looking for collusion between Trump and Vladimir. Why don't they look for the collusion between Hillary just simply pouring money into Vladimir's pockets until it just overflowed? It is disturbing. And if it was Cisco, as you pointed out, Skolkovo was forced upon some of those people. That was Obama and Hillary saying, I'm sorry, you will simply go give this technology to the Russians. And I don't know how that can be considered something good.
Hillary's involvement can't be any clearer. Within 2 days of that $1 billion Cisco payment to Vladimir Putin, Bill Clinton got $500,000 for a 1-hour speech in Moscow.
I'm sure it's a coincidence. Bill is just a captivating speaker. I've heard him speak. I'd pay $1 or $2 to hear a speech myself. So, yeah, I'm sure that's a coincidence. Now, but it's not a coincidence that Hillary gave Vladimir Putin $400 million to build a uranium enrichment plant in Russia during their last nuclear summit. It's all that they've been donating to the Russians just is supposed to keep them up with basically the Cold War. But now what I like is that Little Richie was part of sending out those Cisco routers, which is just hysterical because if you don't know that story, that's what caused the gigantic rift, which was already existed before that, between the NSA and the CIA, particularly the rogue CIA, because the CIA set up a sting to make it look like the NSA was implanting backdoors into all of their Cisco routers. What a complete joke, as you pointed out. That would have been done during manufacturing. That's a complete sting. It was stupid. And yet, what happened? They lost billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in value in Cisco. They almost collapsed. And had it not been for, I believe it was Microsoft coming along and offering them cloud computing, the Internet of Things, based on the Cisco plan, would have collapsed. Cisco still offers the number one Internet of Things full spectrum program, but they would have been simply taken down completely. So Little Richie was there to make sure that as Cisco routers went into Europe and throughout the rest of the world, that those back doors were not messed with so that the complete surveillance can happen. Because remember, Britain and the Five Eyes were, that's America, Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Canada. They worked together like a hand in a glove. And so Little Ricky would have been involved in the worst of the CIA surveillance. And now he goes over and works for Facebook. And Nicholas Clegg, the ex-deputy prime minister of Britain, goes and works for Facebook. Does anybody notice how absolutely bizarre this is? Why would they come there? Well, that's because both of them and most of these people, like Lord Jeffrey Patty or Lord Malik Brown, they are experts in propaganda. And that's what's going on with Facebook. It is a psyops. It is a military-funded psyops. Always has been. It was created with the intent to be exactly that. And what is going on at this moment is they're seeing how far that psyops can manipulate elections. And they're bringing in the very people who, through association with the British Privy Council, have tremendous experience in manipulating elections all over the world. And since George Soros gave $1.5 billion to the Atlantic Council, to Facebook, to incorporate his digital forensic research laboratory, AI, which is probably not really an AI, but anyway, it's the subroutines that they use to scrub Facebook. Those are the same programs being used in Britain to stop free speech in Britain. They've already been used all throughout Europe and the European Union. So these are experts in stopping free speech. So if you ask me, in my very crude opinion, I believe that both Little Ricky and Little Nicky are simply British spies who are coming over to protect the investments of the insider traders who were part of Facebook, to help control its, to basically have a controlled demolition of Facebook, and to probably get set up for the next Facebook that is, I'm sure, already waiting in the wings, just like they have Alphabet waiting in the wings for when Google gets taken down and gets sued too much. It'll simply go bankrupt, and Alphabet, Eric Schmidt's other company, will simply take over. So I'm sure there's a Facebook all ready to go. And it makes me very suspicious that, again, the British come at just the wrong moment, and they're Brits. Why do we really care? They don't know anything about Facebook. They don't know anything about writing software. They don't know anything about free speech.
That's the problem that everyone had with Baron Richard showing up without Zuckerberg, because everyone knows he doesn't know anything. He only went 1 year at Bristol Polytechnic, for crying out loud. And Zuckerberg doesn't know anything, but they wanted to quiz him anyway. And I do think you're right, and it just struck me why they're wanting to preserve Facebook a little longer. And in the database world, one of the things that you have a problem with when you're doing data collection is once you get a methodology set up, you need to keep it going because your data grows stale. And so therefore they've probably got their system of data collection and spying on everyone on the planet using Facebook and Alexa and on all these apps that record you unknowingly on your phone. They've probably got a lot of current data that has to be processed. But if you have a situation where your data collection system stops working, even for a short time, your underlying data starts to grow stale. And that would make your control mechanism less effective going forward. That's probably the reason they want to not see it crash. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. And they will move on to the new system anyway. And you discovered in studying Little Richard.
Yeah, but excuse me for interrupting, but the reason it's an issue with Facebook because that Facebook is the endpoint, like the ends of your fingers, for this system. So without the ability to collect that data at the end of your fingers, then your whole system, your pipeline dries up. And so Facebook in particular is one they can't afford to let go down because they don't have a replacement for it.
I can hear Betsy saying in the background, well, tell them about the fact that they collect all the data. Tell them about the fact that this is all corrupt. Tell them about the fact of the black box that's being created by Eric Schmidt that has your black profile in it. That they're going to control you. It's called the social credit system. Tell them about that. Yes, that's all true. And that's what Facebook did. It was a psyops to see how far they could take it. And now they know exactly how far they can take it. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the next version you're going to be offered will not have freedom involved and certainly will have no free speech. Now, I want to jump over to the Oxford Internet Institute and what you discovered there. After they were founded there, and it's obvious that they were founded as the counterpoint to the IBM Eclipse Foundation and the theft of Leader Technologies' intellectual property, and the way it was then used by many companies and just spread all over the world because they called it open source. And as you pointed out, yeah, it's open source unless it's one of their thousands of patents, which certainly aren't open source. 14,000 patents.
Yeah, the company promoting open source brags in its latest one of its latest press releases, and that's IBM. I got to look up that number now.
It's a funny one for a company that doesn't like patents and wants to have everything open source. So
yeah, IBM brags that they now hold 114,043 patents, the largest patent holder in the world. They're bragging at the end of 2001 that they've found the light and they're going open source.
Oh Lordy, that doesn't count
with
the
our
Chinese
technology.
Doesn't count the Chinese IP they stole or the Chinese patents that they also work with. Oh my Lord, 114,000. But yeah, they're not going to let your patent go through or let you own your patent or because why? It was a national security issue. So they had to seize it, and that's just the way.
Well, the other disingenuous aspect of I keep getting his name wrong, Baron Allen, saying he's anti-patent is going to kill creativity or kill innovation, is his next two employers after he wrote that were Cisco and Facebook, which together, I just looked it up yesterday, holds 16,372 patents between them.
Lord Almighty.
So what's wrong with this picture? They just don't believe anybody has a memory.
Well, I said Lord Almighty. It might actually be Baron Almighty or Count Almighty or Lord Honorable Almighty, because these false titles indicate to me that these are cardboard cutouts, that these are nothing more than the Queen's crown agents come to do their dirty work, which they've been doing since the founding of America. Now, I again want to shift over to Oxford Internet Institute, because what you discovered there, yes, it's a bit of speculation, but not all that much speculation, because Oxford, OII, Oxford Internet Institute, basically was the shadow mimic, the British shadow mimic of what was happening with the IBM Eclipse Foundation. So they knew full well exactly what was coming down the pipelines. And then why then would Oxford Internet Institute shift over to France? And so we started to speculate.
Yes. Well, we didn't talk about that earlier. The person who put up the 15,000 pounds, Dame Stephanie Shirley, who is a legitimate technology person from Sir Geoffrey Patty's days in the 70s and 80s. She really created things and was a legitimate engineer. She donated this money, started this institute with a bunch of academics who now promote mostly mind control techniques and election rigging. So clearly they're probably teed up with Lord Mark Malloch Brown and Sir Geoffrey Patty in all the CIA mind control techniques that are coming out of Oxford and Cambridge. But then we looked at her financial holdings in her companies, and she's got a number of companies, and I think legitimate historically. And at some point after she started Oxford Internet Institute, she sold her main company, which was a IT services company, and she sold it to another company, changed its name, and that company sold to the French. And that company today is called Soprasteria. Two words, Soprasteria. Have you ever heard of them?
I have not, no.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of them either. But shame on us. We started looking into this company, and it is a massive information technology company that essentially runs the data operations centers for most major companies and organizations in Europe and governments. And specifically on their latest annual report, they boasted on their annual report that they have clients which include in the United Kingdom the Ministry of Justice, the Home Office, the Ministry of Defense, and the National Health Service.
That's about everything. Okay. So
and they boasted that they've got major ecosystem partnerships with Google, Apple, Facebook, and IBM and Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have a French company that's managing most of the critical British government infrastructure as a French company. What's wrong with this picture? Because here's, as a technology person, you got to realize something here. When I heard that, I said, "Oh my gosh, here's the problem. They're managing all the IT data that's flying around in the UK, and they can easily grab any of those data streams they want, and read their mail. So here we've got the European version of Hillary and her digital keys.
Exactly. And then it got even more suspicious.
As a French company. Now, we always thought it was the British Privy Council that was the focal point, but all of a sudden, here's a new element of the picture here.
And they added the newest element. They broke down literally how much carbon everyone in their company consumed. In other words, they set up their company as the template for all companies to be taxed for your carbon footprint. In other words, a carbon
this can
currency.
be seen. Right, this can be seen up on the Americans for Innovation website. The latest annual report, it's over 300 pages, so it's don't read it before you're going to bed. But it is a massive document that lays out the carbon credits for this particular company. It is a full audit of carbon credits down to how much carbon each employee in their massive organization consumes. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
And what's interesting is we had to ask the question, why would the Brits, who want to control everything, allow a company that literally accumulates, conglomerates all the data it can, most sensitive data that there is, and then compare it to carbon footprints, or what was about to become the carbon currency of the world, or what would have eventually simply become carbon taxing?
Yes, that's what we see here. That system's already set up. This particular financial report describes how it's going to go down. I encourage everyone to read this.
So essentially, that explained it to us. Because of Brexit, the Brits couldn't control that, and the European Union needed France to control it. Why would Britain even let it leave unless Britain is in a battle, basically in a battle to the death for either globalism by staying with the European Union or nationalism by Brexit? Well, they couldn't trust Britain anymore. So in other words, Britain has been cut out of the picture. And as you said, there was even an assessment about how this would impact things in relationship to that company. And the deal is, France is 100% on board with the climate accord, and they are the ones, one of the biggest promoters of charging people for their carbon footprints. Now, let me explain this. We were supposed to pay in the first year hundreds of billions of dollars, America. China paid nothing. China is the biggest polluter, and so we were supposed to give our money to them. Does this make any sense? And what it was to become was a new international currency to supplant the International Monetary Fund's special drawing rights. And we're going to do a special audio on this very soon with Betsy. You know, she's got a degree in economics, and she's very smart with all this stuff. And she's taught me a lot about it. And what we're going to point out is that it was a trick to pull China into the International Monetary Fund, because that's where they were supposed to get their special drawing rights. But it doesn't work out that way, because the International Monetary Fund is a fraud. And recently, President Trump, sitting across from President Xi, the totalitarian communist dictator, got him to admit that not only they'll stop making fentanyl, since each fentanyl pill kills an American, but that they'll also take apart the World Trade Organization, because it's completely corrupt. The World Trade Organization...
Well, this financial report, in my opinion, if it's not the prototype, it's one of the prototypes that they're floating out there as the way carbon credits are going to be reported by every public company going forward. And it's just unbelievable. It's astounding, the level of analysis that they've gone to. As an engineer, it's stupid, if you ask me. There's so much phony science being used in this discussion of credit. Most of this discussion of credits isn't even being discussed among engineers. It's economists and bankers and academics and people who don't know what they're talking about. And yet they're shoving this carbon credit system down everybody's throats. And now we've even got audited financial statements of this IT company in France showing us how it's going to be done.
As you said earlier, it has nothing to do with the humans on the face of the earth. It's the sun. The sun and the Maunder cycles of the sunspots and the lack of sunspots, what are called solar minimums, solar maximums. There's a Maunder cycle. Every 280 years it goes through it. But we're in a super Maunder cycle, so we're going to go into a mini ice age. The scientists have been telling us for a number of years we've entered into a mini ice age. There is not global warming. That's nonsense. Watch the sun, and you will see that the sun controls the 9 ocean currents and their temperature. That is what controls the temperature and all weather on the Earth.
The carbon credits argument to me is like saying that if every ant on the Earth built a 24/7 campfire, would we even notice? I mean, it's just stupid.
It is stupid.
In my mind.
And it was George H.W. Bush.
I'm not saying we don't have to take care of the Earth. I'm not saying it. I mean, I was one of the early engineering students at Ohio State who advocated for environmental engineering within the civil engineering department. So I'm with it. I've been with it my whole career. But this argument is not being made by people who know what they're talking about. It's made by politicians and people who want to put your money in their pocket.
And with fallacious,
and control you as well.
Right. And with fallacious, erroneous data. It's all been faked, and that's now been proven ever since Trump came to power. The entire myth has just been flushed down the toilet. Now, what people don't understand is that the evil George H.W. Herbert Walker Bush, when he declared the New World Order was going to take over the world through the United Nations, he wasn't kidding. That would be the political arm. The United States was the military arm, and the only thing they didn't have in place was the economic branch, because they didn't have a world currency. And they thought it was going to be through Rothschild and Rothschild-styled central banks, but that hasn't worked out because 7 nations have resisted. So Barack Obama bombed all 7 of those nations and created 58 million refugees, which were then turned into an invasion of Europe, so that the chaos would then cause a need for all the rest of those countries to get central banks. That is never going to happen. So the scam with the International Monetary Fund to bring in Russia and China into luring them with special drawing rights didn't work either. So then they went with the carbon footprint, which is a complete myth, and they actually created the statistics to support that. So we were 1 inch away from having the economic branch of the 3 branches that are necessary to run the world with the New World Order, basically globalism, through the United Nations, as soon as we got the carbon footprint tax. And it is a tax, folks. Each and every person will be taxed. And we were 1 inch away from it. It
appears that this company, Soprosteria, is the IT infrastructure for carbon credits. And the story all started by just trying to figure out who Baron Richard, what's his last name again?
Allen.
Baron Richard Allen was in representing Facebook. And the puzzling thing from this idea that this French company is somehow the heir to all of these controls in England is still puzzling. But I ask you, doesn't it make sense in a macro sense that it would be a French company and not, in fact, the Privy Council? Because isn't France really the power center for the Rothschilds in international banking?
Yes, and the Climate Accord, the Paris Climate Accord, and look at Macron, what he's about to do, and he's married to a Rothschild, and yes, absolutely, and the Rothschilds basically still rule France. So yes, I think you're quite right, and it makes perfectly good sense why a very strong supporter of the European Union, France, would be in control of this. But what is so beautiful is that once again, through your research, you have not only just, matter of fact, this only became, you only started researching this because I think I complained to you. I said, what about this? There's another dadgum lord or baron running Facebook. And you said, what are you talking about? And so you started researching it, and you found him to be such a weak link. And as we're talking about this, going back and forth, and all the research is talking to you, and we're discussing this, we can't quite get the angle on it. And then OII, Oxford Internet Institute, we find because of the soy boy weak link, he's the weak link in that chain. They just showed you, and you showed the world. They made him a
fellow, a 1-year Bristol Polytechnic student, and they made him a fellow. That was the key, by the way. I'm just thinking of that. That was wrong.
Link.
You just don't do that.
Yeah, it's the weak link.
That's illegitimate academics.
And too easy to follow, and it stunk so bad that you just kept looking. I mean, you might not have ever come across, so your research is OII, Oxford Internet Institute.
No, we haven't. We haven't at all.
I've never heard of it.
No.
And yet, it's another Hillary type with her crypto key tax on the internet. This is like a new tax on everybody for breathing. If you breathe, you're going to be given a carbon tax bill because they consider breathing to be global warming. And it's unbelievable. And literally, whether you sit at a desk or whether you work in the field, then your company is going to be charged based upon that, whether you drove a car, or you drove a truck, or you drove... This is another form almost of social credit, but it's a currency. It's a tax that will be placed upon you against your will. Thank you very much, Al Gore. We never believed you to begin with, those of us with a brain.
Wait, Douglas. I'm holding my breath so I won't exhale any carbon dioxide.
It'll save you on your tax bill. Good. Try not to breathe so much. You know, it can really bring your tax bill
Okay, I'll try
down.
to breathe less.
So, again...
Sorry for living.
Exactly. Sorry for having anything to do with carbon. I don't even know what carbon is, but I'm very sorry for it. Well, what we see here is every time they do something where they expose themselves because of their stupidity, it just causes the researchers and the citizen journalists to say, wait a second. And then when we look, what do we find? We find the plan they were going to put in place if Trump had not been elected. Had Hillary been elected, we would already have this tax placed upon every company in America. And
we would. He was a godsend.
So thank you for finding the weak link. I love it when you find these, what do you call them, beta boys, your soy boys, these cardboard cutout Silicon Valley cons. It's just beautiful. They think that they're warlords, tech warlords, but they're a bunch of silly soy boys. This guy, Baron Richard Allen, has no weight. And when you looked at that, when we all looked at that, it was so obvious that we pushed hard enough to come out to the other side, to a place we didn't even know.
You know what? Just we were sitting around in a espresso moment, and we were asking ourselves, what are we learning about these people? And one of the things that we realize is we're learning about people who have spent their lives developing a vocabulary to talk to immoral people who've developed a vocabulary to talk to moral people in a way that fools them. And in the process of doing that, they've learned that buys them time. And so what they've learned is they can keep ahead of moral people by continually lying and continually being given the benefit of the doubt. And therefore, they've made that their business. And we've got to get to the point where we've got to stop using. I don't know how we do this because they're using our rules against us, our moral rules against us. And the beautiful mechanism that was conceived by the founders isn't working. And on paper, it sounds good, but we're not doing it. So how are we going to, as you say, raise our level of consciousness and stop listening to these endemic liars who have learned that they can talk a good game and not mean any of it? They've become brilliant at it.
Oh, they are. They're so brilliant at it. But I think the answer to that, one of the partial answers to that, is citizen journalism. We have to bring the truth out. We have to teach people discernment. We have to show these people for who they are. And it is only by that fourth estate, that free press, the real free press, not the fake press, that then we can inform everyone else so that then they can make their own proper political choices.
That's a good point. Once moral people get the facts, they will act. But these guys are geniuses at hiding the facts. I mean, look at Baron Richard, for example. He's spent his whole life hiding from his history, and nobody ever looked.
Yes, and look
I
at
guess.
France. Look at France. I mean, good heavens. What's happening there is because they don't have free speech, they had to take it to the streets. So, folks, if they keep squelching free speech with people like Little Richie and Little Nicky in Facebook and in Google and in all the other social platforms, then they're just going to have to, we're going to have to vote with our feet. We're going to have to vote with our money in our pocketbooks and let them collapse and move forward with a free press, move forward with a lack of British control, and making sure that we do not bring a carbon footprint tax to everyone, making sure that we change the internet tax, Hillary's crypto keys, and making sure that we put the power of America back into the hands of we the people. Michael, thank you for having this discussion with us. It's always enlightening.
Hey, great to talk to you. Say hi to Betsy, please.